I'm thinking of a name change for the show to The Mask Story with Dan Haggerty, or maybe just The Mask.
Okay.
Because we could fill an entire week's worth of shows with all of the questions you have about Governor Brown's upcoming mask requirements.
Somebody stop me.
And we're going to answer a few of them for you today.
Why? Because I gotta.
Before voting to slash $15 million from the police budget, Commissioner Joanne Hardesty had a point to make.
Where were you when Kendra James was shot and killed? Where were you when Keaton Otis was shot and killed? Where were you when Aaron Campbell was killed?
Tonight, we revisit those three stories. And way before many white Oregonians recognized the meaning of this day.
When she bought Juneteenth to Oregon,
Her grandmother did, and it earned her a nickname few can claim.
Mother of Juneteenth.
Here's the story.
That's a great story. I can't wait for you to see it. How about Jim Carrey as the Mask entering that shot like that? I like that move. It was a good one. I'm Dan Haggerty. Hi. We made it. It's Friday. Whew. Welcome to the story. End of another really busy week. Multnomah County entered phase 1 today. I booked a haircut a little bit earlier. I had the same feeling when I hit book on the computer as I do when you buy those plane tickets for a big family vacation. And that's kind of where I'm at in all of this. I'm okay with it. I'm actually excited to see my barber. She's a great listener, and I love to talk. Now, hopefully you do too, because I want to hear from you tonight. You can find me on Facebook, Dan Haggerty, KGW. Email us at thestory@kgw.com or hop on Twitter and use that hashtag, HeyDan. Hey, and as we get started, we normally don't do this sort of thing, but we think it's worth talking about first right off the bat tonight, because if you know anything about the interstate bridge around this time, well, you know what this means. Vancouver Black Lives Matter protesters are giving Portland protesters a little run for their money right now, taking over the southbound lanes of the interstate bridge. Listen, this is not the show where we talk about traffic reports. I don't say cliche things like pack your patience. So do with this information what you need to do with this information. But all I want to know is which bridge is next, because we got a lot of them. All right, let's talk about tonight's big story. And I want to talk about some words that I just have not left my thoughts since I first heard them 2 days ago. Something said at Wednesday's city council meeting. Now, if you don't remember, Wednesday, the city passed its 2021 budget, which part of it, they slashed $15 million from the Portland police budget. Something Commissioner Joanne Hardesty fought hard for and has been fighting for in her decades-long career in Portland. Now, some activists have said the $15 million doesn't go far enough, and they criticize Hardesty because she settled for less. That's when Hardesty said this. We're just going to go ahead and play it out. Take a listen.
I have to say, for all the new young white people who all of a sudden are demanding equality for black folks in the community, where were you when Kendra James was shot and killed? Where were you when Keaton Otis was shot and killed because the police thought, the Portland Gang Enforcement Unit thought he looked like he might be a gang member? Where were you when Aaron Campbell was killed? I could go through the entire list, and I can tell you, you were not with me reading police reports. You were not with me advocating at the city council for changes. You were not with me demanding the Department of Justice come and fix our broken police system. You were not present. And I want you to know that it is not appropriate for you to say to me that I have not gone far enough. You don't know the shoes that I've walked in over the 30 years that I've lived in Portland. And I am honored to have a seat on the city council in this time where we are making transformational changes. There's nowhere else in the world I would want to be. But I'm going to lose patience with people that tell me that I don't know what I'm doing, and I have not done enough for police accountability in this community.
I made me feel something. It made me feel a lot of things. And it really made me want to go back and learn more about those people who she mentioned. Kendra James, Keaton Otis, and Aaron Campbell. I'm wondering how many of you remember those names. And I'm sure some of you do remember the names, right? But how well do you remember exactly what happened? Some of you probably hearing those names for the first time. That was me, right? I'm new here. I know a lot of you are new too. This is a fast-growing city. So I thought that we should take a look back. And we're going to start where Commissioner Hardesty started.
Where were you when Kendra James was shot and killed?
Okay, that was May 5th, 2003. Kendra James was 21 years old. She was in the back seat of a car the police pulled over for not fully stopping at a stop sign. Willamette Week wrote at the time, undoubtedly, the real reason he pulled over the car was that he saw it pull out from a budget motel on North Interstate Avenue where cops suspect drug dealing goes on. Police arrested the driver for a warrant related to drugs. They started interviewing other people in the car, and James jumped from the back seat to the driver's seat. There was a scuffle in the cab. The car started rolling forward, and Officer Scott McCollister, a rookie cop, fired one shot that killed Kendra James. The officer said that he was afraid he was going to fall out of the car and that he could have been hit or run over, so he fired. Witnesses, though, remembered it differently. They said that he was outside of the vehicle and on his feet when the gun went off. And according to a report in the Portland Mercury, a forensic expert couldn't find any gunshot residue inside the car. The public demanded answers at the time, but they got very few. DA Mike Strunk decided against a preliminary hearing, meaning that they would have heard some evidence what was going on. They didn't get to hear it. Instead, it went to a private grand jury, which declined to prosecute. This led the public to outcry. That later turned into a lawsuit in 2005, where a jury did ultimately rule that Officer McCollister was justified in the shooting of Kendra James. But the lack of transparency was clear, so to speak.
Where were you when Keaton Otis was shot and killed? Because the police thought, the Portland Gang Enforcement Unit thought he looked like he might be a gang member.
Keaton Otis was not a gang member. He'd never even been arrested. His death became a glaring example of how tragedy can happen when an armed officer engages with someone experiencing a mental crisis. On May 12, 2010, officers from Portland's Hotspot Enforcement Action Team, they had just left a coffee shop downtown, and they spotted 25-year-old Keaton Otis behind the wheel of his mother's car, but they didn't know that. In fact, documents showed that the officers found him to be suspicious because he was staring at them in the side mirror of the car as they followed him and was slouching and wearing a hoodie on a warm day. And according to one officer, quote, kind of looks like he could be a gangster and didn't seem to fit the car he was in. They pulled him over for changing lanes without signaling, and 3 minutes later, he was dead after an argument led to a scuffle to get him out of the car, and Otis grabbing this gun from his glove box and shooting an officer in the leg. Cell phone video captures the moments when officers fired back, 32 shots, hitting Otis 23 times. Here's the clip. You can hear it for yourself. It goes on and goes on and on. A grand jury called it justified. I found this article by the Oregonian from 2014 about Otis titled Race, Mental Illness, and a City's Lost Son. His mother said Otis battled mental illness for years. He had been diagnosed with a mood disorder and stopped taking his medication. His mom tried to get him further treatment, but since he was over 18, she couldn't force him. Joanne Hardesty was interviewed in that piece and was quoted saying, "Portlanders get outraged for a moment, then we go back to our lattes." Portland police made changes after Otis's death, but they were actually already in the works because of another shooting that had happened months earlier. That was the third name that Hardesty mentioned.
Where were you when Aaron Campbell was killed? I could go through the entire list, and I can tell you, you were not with me reading police reports.
I looked through the reports too, now 10 years after Commissioner Hardesty first read them. Police killed 25-year-old Aaron Campbell on January 29, 2010, after his aunt called 911, saying that her nephew was suicidal over the death of his younger brother. Police responded by surrounding his apartment with multiple units, dogs, and a police sniper. When negotiators talked Campbell outside and he didn't respond quickly enough to their commands, they shot him with beanbag rounds. And when he ran for cover, the sniper shot him in the spine with a bullet. When he fell, the first officer to reach him was a police dog, and he died as it ripped at his leg. Police released 700 pages of documents about that day after a massive uproar from the community. The sniper said, he just dove his hand straight down the middle of his back and instantly thought he is pulling a gun out. But when they searched Campbell's body, he was unarmed. 2 years later, his family settled with the city of Portland for $1.2 million and got an apology from then Mayor Sam Adams. No one was ever charged. The officer was fired, but later reinstated after a third-party investigation. Now, in that original clip from Joanne Hardesty, you could feel the frustration in the commissioner's voice during that statement. And I'm sure part of her is waiting for people to go back to their lattes. Instead, I recommend you try Google and the names she mentioned and all the others that she didn't. Today was a contradiction in Oregon, you could say, especially Multnomah County, I think, because even though it was day one of phase one of reopening here in Portland, any sense of celebration was kind of framed with worry that we might take a step back and have to do all of this all over again. Now, we don't like to focus too much on numbers out of context, but the fact is Oregon has been going through a bit of a COVID-19 spike right now in cases. Today, we saw 204, only the second time we have topped 200 in a day, the first time being Tuesday when we hit 278. We've got more than 6,200 cases total out of more than 184,000 tests. But relatively good news here is our percentage of positive tests is actually pretty low compared to the rest of the U.S. We're at 3.3% of people tested here. They test positive. The national average is 12%. But for reference, Union County, for instance, which saw a huge spike this week, has a rate of more than 21%. So we really are talking about the differences between county to county, not necessarily state to state. But for now, in Portland, leaders are not that concerned about hospital capacity. That's been the concern since day one, right? But another factor that they still need to keep in mind is how much personal protective equipment that our medical workers have on hand right now. And Maggie Vespa checked to see how we are doing on that front.
It was one of several frightening storylines to emerge in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Nationwide, personal protective equipment, or PPE, was suddenly in dangerously short supply. Things like medical-grade masks, gloves, face shields, and so on. Oregon being no exception, doctors and nurses told jarring stories about being forced to reuse soiled masks, wear swim goggles on the job, and make their own face coverings. In Seattle, nurses used supplies from Home Depot. In the months since, production of the gear ramped up and the alarms once sounded about the problem quieted down. But reps from the Oregon Nurses Association say things still aren't where they need to be.
We don't know. There's a gap of information. All we know is nurses aren't safe.
Rachel Gumpert is the spokesperson for the ONA, the union representing thousands of nurses across Oregon. She says what it boils down to is this: major hospitals, namely OHSU, are doing much better. But she says several others, especially smaller hospitals in rural communities, are still not getting it right.
We are not clear that this is a supply chain issue anymore. We're being told by hospitals across the state that they have enough PPE. And yet what is happening is nurses are still being forced to reuse broken or damaged N95 masks.
In particular, Gumpert said Columbia Memorial Hospital in Astoria is still forcing nurses to reuse their PPE. We've reached out to them, but haven't yet heard back. We also reached out to Portland area hospitals about their supplies. A spokesman for Providence simply wrote they are, quote, confident in our ability to supply personal protective equipment to keep our caregivers and patients safe. While hospitals have traditionally bought their own PPE, during this pandemic, the state and counties have served as backup. Earlier this year, the Oregon Health Authority made it clear their stockpile was running dry and they were waiting on a shipment from the feds. We reached out to the OHA today, but haven't yet heard back. So we turned to Multnomah County, who gets its PPE from the state, and we found a good sign. The county, who pre-pandemic had never had to keep PPE on hand, now has 60 days worth in a stockpile.
We were not in this game. We had a supply of zero basically when this started, and we still have in stock about 1.4 million masks alone right now. So as groups come to us, if there is a shortfall, we actually will help provide masks.
Maggie Vespa, KGW News.
Not many people can be called
Mother of Juneteenth.
but her grandmother can for her stand 75 years ago. And would you like to mask me a question? If you do, we've got you covered. Your mask questions answered when the story continues. And I promise, no more puns.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Story. We're getting a lot of different questions into the hashtag #HeyDan and your emails this week. And they've been a lot of them have been about masks, especially since they've been required in a bunch of counties starting on Wednesday. So we wanted to take a few minutes and answer a few of them right now. Roseanne asked this question that a lot of people have been asking: if for medical reasons you are unable to wear a mask and the store refuses entry, Isn't that discrimination? That's a great question. And the basic answer is yes, it is. People with disabilities that make it harder to breathe and kids under 12 are exempt from the governor's order. Now, I'm not quite sure if you can use that argument to get into a grocery store, for instance, that's trying to turn you away. We're still asking those questions. Remember, the order only applies to these 7 counties, the metro counties, Marion, Polk, Hood River, and Lincoln counties too. But any county, keep this in mind too, can opt in if they want to and make it required there as well. But hopefully you don't need to be ordered to wear a mask when you're out in public. You should anyway, just to keep your neighbors safe. We did reach out to the state of Oregon to help us answer a couple of your other questions. Let's get to those now. Alyssa wanted to know, do we wear masks inside our gyms when we exercise? No, you don't have to do that. The state listed a few other exceptions in its guidelines here. You don't need a mask when at a business and engaged in an activity that makes wearing a mask, face shield, or face covering not feasible, such as strenuous physical exercise, singing, or playing an instrument, if at least 6 feet of distance is maintained from others. So as long as you're keeping your distance, you're all good. Another viewer asked, hey Dan, does requiring masks apply to high-rise apartments too, at least common areas and elevators, things like that? No, actually they don't. A spokesperson for the governor's office says apartments don't count as businesses, so they aren't required. However, they are still encouraged. You should wear them if you're in a public area like a common room or an elevator. In our final question, I've got to say we've been getting this a lot. This one's from Jay Schuler. How do you eat with a mask on your face? All right, I'm going to give you a little benefit of the doubt here. I'm going to assume that you're just an extra considerate person who doesn't want to take their mask off around anybody ever. So well done if that's you. But the answer is pretty simple. If you're at a restaurant, once you're seated, just take off the mask and enjoy your meal. If you have to go up to the restroom or leave the table, or you're walking to and from the table, put it on. Common sense kind of stuff. Keep those questions coming. Use the hashtag HeyDan or email the story at kgw.com. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Thanks, Dan, and hey, everybody. The weather story. We're going to talk about humidity tonight and today. And, you know, everybody loves it when the humidity is low. It's more comfortable, feels better. We're heading into the dry time of the year right now. We have several days next week with low humidity. We had low humidity today. But what about the impacts on the coronavirus? For that, you might actually want things to be a little bit steamier. That's right. High humidity actually helps to fight the coronavirus. Here's how that works. Let me show you the graphic right now and how that goes down. In dry air, large droplets of moisture that contain the virus, presumably, they break into small floating droplets. The moisture in them will evaporate a bit, so they actually linger in the air longer, thus increasing the chance of them spreading to another person. So that's one way. There's actually 3 ways that how humidity helps fight the coronavirus. Airborne winter viruses, of which corona is one, they're just not as infectious in humid air. Now, whatever tools the virus uses to be virulent, they don't work as well in humid air. They work better in dry air. And you know what? Epidemiologists and scientists don't really understand why that is. They just know that it is. So that's another reason. Then the last reason is a little simpler. Your respiratory system. It actually fights infections better in humid air, all the way down to the cellular level. So it just works better. Your respiratory system works better when it's not fighting dry air. So those are the 3 reasons of how humidity helps fight COVID. So do we want more humidity? Well, we'll either get it or not. We don't live in a very humid part of the country in the dry season like this. Our humidity is typically a lot lower than it is east of the Rockies. You may be wondering, okay, what about hot weather? Well, extreme heat, like really hot weather, will kill the virus, but not an 87-degree day like today. That won't do it. Of course, we've seen the coronavirus with outbreaks in very hot places like Texas and Florida still going on and increasing. So you know the really hot weather is going to do it. But our clear, dry air actually can help to spread the virus a little bit more than if we have high humidity. I don't know if there's going to be a lot of people rooting for high humidity this summer, Dan, because of that. But it's certainly something to think about. Back to you.
You made a good point with Florida and Texas, though. I've lived in both of those places, and I can tell you it is hot and it is humid, and they're still seeing outbreaks there, so we can't count on any of that. Matt, thank you so much.
That's right.
Hey, we're reading some comments after the break. Pick up your phone, use that hashtag HeyDan, and get ready also to learn about a Portland woman who became known as the mother of Juneteenth when we finish the story. We couldn't finish the week without commemorating a big anniversary here at KGW. This week, our very own Dr. D, Pat Doris, the professor himself, celebrated 30 years with us, and we couldn't do it right without dipping into the KGW vault. Let's just say that Pat Doris is a regular around here.
President's statements here were the toughest from him to date on the spotted owl, and certainly set the stage for a very tough review of the Endangered Species Act if he is reelected. In Medford, Pat Doris, News 8.
Hasn't he aged beautifully? I mean, look at this. He's been an amazing reporter for a long time. Here's to 30 more years if you got him in you, Doris. Thanks for making us better all these years. Hey, thanks so much for being with us tonight. A lot of people continuing to write in, asking questions using that hashtag, Hey Dan. Again, we use this to feed this story. So without you, we're nothing. Keep them coming. And on this Juneteenth holiday, we're going to leave you with a story from Catherine Cook of a woman who brought Juneteenth to Portland, earned the nickname the Mother of Juneteenth. I hope you enjoy the rest of your holiday. Remember what it means and remember the work that still needs to be done. That's the end of the story for tonight. The news at 6:30 is next. Have a good weekend.
She was my hero. She's my biggest fan. She was my motivator.
Janelle Jack's heart swells with pride when she thinks of her late grandmother, Clara Peoples.
She's my guardian angel now.
A woman with twinkling eyes, a wry smile, and a special legacy.
Well, she brought Juneteenth to Oregon when she worked at the shipyard.
It was 1945. Clara Peoples asked her boss if they could celebrate Juneteenth on their break in the Vanport shipyards. She brought the tradition with her from Oklahoma. Years later, in 1972, Clara helped organize Portland's annual Juneteenth celebration, which the city has enjoyed ever since. It earned Clara a special nickname,
Mother of Juneteenth.
Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, also known as Freedom Day, a day on which Major General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, and declared that all slaves were free. It had taken 2 years for news of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation to reach Texas. Word traveled much more slowly in those days. But what a celebration when it did.
Juneteenth is America's second Independence Day. And it's really the Independence Day where all Americans were free.
In 1980, Texas became the first state to declare Juneteenth a holiday. Janelle says her grandmother would have a lot to say about what's going on in our nation's history now.
She would be happy. She would feel accomplished and have the biggest smile on her face.
This month, the city of Portland and Multnomah County moved to observe Juneteenth as a paid holiday for the first time. And on Thursday, Governor Kate Brown issued a proclamation officially declaring June 19th Juneteenth and announced plans to make it a state holiday.
Her words will be right on, right on.
Following in her grandmother's footsteps, Janelle is now director of Juneteenth Oregon. And like her grandmother, she continues to build Juneteenth as a way to unite all communities.
Now Juneteenth seems like it's a household name and I love it, but keeping that momentum going for years to come.
In Portland, Catherine Cook, KGW News.